What's up, everybody? We have 10 minutes here. Ryan Muckenhirn is across the table from us. We're not going to talk about cartridges necessarily today, but we are going to talk a little bit about free-floating your barrel, or maybe not. There's a number of different rifles out there that have free-floated barrels. You'll see that terminology thrown around a lot when it comes to what stock, what chassis, what fore-end it's using, depending on what type of platform. And free-floating your barrel, for the most part, it seems like people say that if you free-float your barrel, it means nothing is touching the barrel. Essentially, the barrel is connected to the receiver of the rifle, and then it extends out, and it's unobtruded, untouched by anything else on the gun. And at least in theory, and probably most of the time in practice, it seems to be an aid in accuracy or consistency or something of the gun. Ryan, can you explain a little bit about what it is, what it does, and why it's supposed to be better than a non-free-floated barrel?
So in theory, if you have a barrel running down the barrel channel of your stock, and that stock contacts your barrel, either just because of the inletting job that was done on the stock, or due to like humidity increase, decrease, and that stock kind of swelling, or even fore-end pressure, that pressure put on your barrel is going to change the way that it kind of reverberates under the firing sequence, which can change your point of impact. It can adversely affect accuracy.
I mean, I'm picturing it like you're almost like hitting a bump in the road.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes, like what you were describing there, which was you're talking about pressure on the fore-end. Let's say you put your rifle in a rest or something like that, and then it comes up and it actually touches the barrel. Now that is a case where the barrel may have been free-floated before, but then something altered and changed it to then touch the barrel, so it's no longer fully free-floated. Now, there are some rifles even out there that just aren't free-floated to begin with, like your old-school M4s and M16s, where they have the non-free-floated fore-end or handguard, or then you've got some of the older bolt-action rifles and lever guns with their barrel bands that wrap around the barrel and the handguard, stuff like that. Even some, like I know we were talking about this on my Browning BLR. I took the decorative barrel band off for this reason, but failed to realize or just think of the fact that there is a screw that goes up from the fore-end or the handguard underneath the barrel into the actual barrel to hold it on. I didn't realize that because I was like, now I've properly free-floated my barrel. Well, no, there's still
So did you have to put it back on then?
No, I didn't. No, the barrel band didn't need to go back on. There was a decorative barrel band. It wasn't actually holding anything together. There's an actual screw that goes up into that handguard. So anyway, there are some rifles that are just not free-floated to begin with.
Yeah.
But
Well, and I'll ask the question too, and maybe we'll get there. So maybe we're stacking too many things at once here. But you hear rifles come with, it's got a free-floated barrel, and then somebody comes, oh man, dude, I fully bedded this thing, and you're like, no, you have constant contact. Like, what's better?
Yeah,
Depends.
Oh boy,
Depends on the gun.
Explain.
So individual rifles can exhibit some interesting things on the bench. I've got a couple of guns that have very light profile barrels, like pencil weight barrels, that absolutely benefited from having either fore-end pressure or support just forward of like where the barrel leaves the receiver, kind of the shank before the taper of the barrel occurs. Having some sort of support there, or in the case like I've got a Kimber Mountain Ascent, that's full contact down the fore-end.
Yeah.
And free floating it is not necessarily going to improve anything. The rifle shoots exceptionally well. So there's no real reason for me to relieve the barrel channel at all.
Okay.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, I've seen plenty of rifles out there that are not free-floated that shoot lights out.
Yep. And in that case, there's probably not a huge benefit to doing it, with the caveat, like, if it's a wood-stocked gun, depending on the wood and whether it's stable, if it gets wet or, it swells or it changes dimensionally at all, then bad things can happen. And I think a lot of the free-floating practice came out of older wood-stocked guns that did not have free-floated barrels to begin with. They were just inletted into the barrel channel so that the barrel fit. And then shooters and military users found that under environmental conditions that warranted the swelling of wood, their POIs would change or their accuracy would change adversely, and then they would free float them, and then that would mitigate that. But it's not a guarantee that free floating your rifle that isn't free floated is going to make any resounding difference. It could make things worse. And then you can remove material, but if you find that it makes it worse, then you've got to kind of start adding material, either strategically or you do a full contact bed and start over. You know, or go back to square one. Now, I will say this about adding bedding material to a barrel channel that's been relieved. So a lot of the bedding material used, and you can buy bedding compound for your stock, and it's like purpose built for that. I know a lot of other guys use Bondo or a product called Marine Tex. It's a really, really hard polymer, I guess, that when cured, it becomes like concrete, but it's not concrete. And in replacing the contact points of a wood stock on the barrel with that material, it is in itself intrinsically stable, and you can still maintain full contact, but not have to worry to the degree that you would with like wood on steel contact, that fluctuation in dimension of that stock at that barrel channel is going to make some sort of, catastrophic.
Do you know with just like, modern rifles these days that are coming with a wood stock, I'd say typically they are free-floated barrel.
A lot of them are.
Or maybe some of those that you're describing earlier, Jim, they're not. But I guess I'm thinking of like a modern bolt gun deer hunting rifle. Are those stocks really swelling? I mean, they seem pretty impervious to the elements.
I would say that wood is probably not impervious to the elements, even with like a good, if you think about like firewood, like you cure firewood before you burn it so it's good and dried through. Well, if it rains on it, then we got to start over. Right. So, no, I don't think that it's necessarily impervious to the elements.
I mean, not like 100%, but it seems like they do a pretty damn good job.
With like finish applications over the top of it that make it water resistant, then it's probably fine.
But then you take it out, you get it beat up, you get it scratched up, that scratches those finishes off, and then it can,
Yeah. I think I see a lot of stuff free-floated because it probably does make a difference, but I almost wonder more so that if you see that free-floated barrel thing, very clever marketing term. Like when people are going down the list of things that make this rifle good, they say free-floated barrel. Like, that's what I want.
Right.
Because the gun regs have talked about it for as long as I've been reading, so like 4 years now.
Congratulations, by the way,
thank you.
on your anniversary.
Don Phonics worked great.
It did. Level 6. I think that it's probably now thrown into the checklist of requirements for super accuracy. Probably just because, but it can make a difference. I don't necessarily advocate going out and hogging out your barrel channel to make your gun free-floated if it's not, because you may be doing this in futility, and it could make it worse. And then you've got to kind of go backwards and hope something works.
Now, we've talked a lot about, just hunting rifles. We tend to a lot, but and maybe we'll still talk about those a little bit here. But I know like a lot of times when you look at these competition rifles, these real heavy, big rifles that are probably going to be shot where people are loading the bipod a lot, and they're relying on this extreme accuracy at long ranges. A lot of those you see are free-floated forends. Sometimes, it's a full chassis that's free-floated. And I do feel like when somebody is putting a lot of pressure on that forend, it makes a fair amount of sense just for consistency's sake and to have something that's really rigid so that it's not flexing so much.
Absolutely.
Like I know there's we talk about it a lot, a Ruger American stock back there behind you, and I shot with that stock actually on my Ruger American at 2, I think, Vortex Extreme. Yes, 2 Vortex Extremes. And I was getting some funny POI shift prior to going that I couldn't figure out when we were at the range testing it, and it was because it's that stock that it comes with is fairly flexible, and while it is kind of free-floated, as I was sort of trying to preload the bipod and do all these things that a bunch of the long-range guys around me were telling me to do, I was flexing the stock up enough, sometimes to touch the barrel, and sometimes not enough to touch the barrel, and that would change things. And it's kind of amazing how little it really takes to change your POI. I mean, that BLR again, I'll bring up. I changed the tension on that screw that we were talking about. Remember, you were like, because I was getting some funny, the POI was shifting upward, and I couldn't explain it. I had no idea what was going on. And I found out that screw was backing out because it was kind of loose. Well, then I tightened it, and then everything changed again.
Yeah.
And, this whole putting some pressure on it via loading your bipod or putting it in the, crotch of a tree branch when you're out hunting or really doing any number of things. It's funny how, like I said, Little things can make a big difference. But then also there's so many times where someone's like, well, will that change anything or will that make a big difference? And it's kind of like, nah, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal.
Free floating is one of those things. It may make a difference.
Yeah.
Better or worse.
It may.
Maybe. If you've got a rifle...
Is this like the most useless podcast?
Maybe.
No,
maybe.
Well, thanks a lot, guys.
I don't-
You just told me
I think
maybe.
Brian brought up like a super good point, though. If you've got a gun that's shooting really good and you're like, oh, man, but it's not free-floated, like you said, don't go...
I wouldn't touch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not... You might make it better, but you might not.
I think it's some rifles that are definitely not free-floated that exhibit stellar accuracy. Mauser 98, Springfield 1903, some Mosin Nagants, M1 carbine, or not M1 carbines, M1 Grands, M14s, M16s, and you can get just phenomenal accuracy out of them, not free-floated. You can free-float them to some degree, maybe not like the M1s, M1As or M1 Grands, but like M16s you can get, or AR-15s, you can get free-floated handguards that look similar to the two-piece handguards that come on it, and you can see some improvement there, especially if you're doing positional shooting with slings and you're not pulling on an anchor point on the rifle that's then pulling on the barrel. But, I mean, yeah, if you've got a gun that shoots good and it's not free-floated, I wouldn't really necessarily jump in there with a dowel and some sandpaper and make it free-floated.
No touchy.
Yeah. And then, I just think that if anybody is shooting and you have a barrel that's free-floated, but it's in a stock that maybe you feel could be exhibiting some pressure on it, or now that we've maybe brought this up, you're like, oh, that could be it. It is worth checking because, right, I mean, you do a lot of shooting here, and oftentimes, if a customer's ever having an issue that's sort of one of those unexplainable issues, where it's not like, well, I dropped it off a cliff and it broke in two pieces because, there it is 50 feet down. That's obvious. But some of those unexplainable things were like, well, I just can't understand what's going on. Many times, you've sort of, by deductive reasoning, arrived at some sort of contact with the barrel that's inconsistent or something like that.
And that's the big key. The consistency is the key to success. And when you introduce some level of inconsistency, that's where we see groups go erratic. I was on the range actually just the other day doing a range certification, actually shooting a chassis gun that we have here. And my fore-end placement on the rest that we were shooting dictated success or failure.
Really?
But that's a free-floated system.
It was, but I'm still changing the way everything moves.
The harmonics and everything.
And so it's a very rigid, and it's also a very metal chassis. And the contact point, I went from a polymer component on said metal chassis to a metal component on said metal chassis. And the groups literally went from like 2 MOA to slide forward 2.5 inches onto this polymer component onto the chassis. The groups then turned into, I think I shot a 0.3 with that optic, like 3 times in a row. Yeah. And then duplicated.
That's crazy.
Yeah, duplicated the error too by just moving it back on there so that I was on then a metal component of the chassis. So, there's some voodoo science in it.
Well, you talk about introducing like different variables. Now we're getting, I guess, maybe more into accuracy. But, again, Jim, you're talking about, flexing that rifle stock. And you may have been at the range. Maybe you got all your sandbags, and so you're shooting off your sandbags. And you get a good zero, and then you go hit the field. You're like, I'm going to put a bipod on for this hunt, or for what I'm going to go shoot this long range thing. And now maybe you are loading the forend more because you have a bipod on it now.
Yeah.
And then now you've, it's kind of like that chain of events that starts to, and you're like, well, I'm at this I'm doing my thing, and now what's going on? I'm having this erratic, inconsistency, and
it always helps to do. It's like they say in sports, you practice like you play.
Yeah.
If you sight in completely differently, and this is where I know we've had some arguments with people, over the old, kind of like weighted gun vices thing when you're sighting in on that, and they're like, well, it's all about getting the rifle perfect, and it's like, well, you are a part of the rifle when everything goes off the rifle, as we've mentioned in numerous 2A debates and AR-15 debates and quote assault weapon whatever debates. The rifle itself, it can't shoot by itself. You have to be a part of it, and you go into the accuracy. And so if you don't make that a consistent thing when you're practicing and how it's all set up and shot, then it absolutely can change when you go out and use it however you're going to use it in real life. Cool.
Should we keep it under 15?
Yeah, let's do it. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening/watching. And as usual, let us know what you think. If you prefer to free float your barrel, maybe you've got some that you don't free float, but they shoot great. Whatever you want. Or if you just want to yell at us, primarily Ryan, especially Ryan, go for it in the comments on YouTube or on Instagram. We love hearing from you guys. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
See you next time.
See ya.
Bye.